Hi, everyone. Just wanted to thank everyone for joining today. I'm going to give a quick introduction, then we're going to let our presenter take the floor. So good afternoon and welcome to the second concurrent session of the day, Flipped Classrooms, Two Sides of the Coin. Our presenter today is Dr. Kimberly Barker from Central Carolina Community College. Dr. Barker is an educator, program developer in sciences, health sciences, psychology, and criminal justice. Kimberly received her undergraduate degrees in biology, chemistry, and math with research in genetics. She also holds a master's degree and PhD in psychology with a forensics specialization. She has taught in these disciplines at various levels, from middle school through college courses. She is also a forensic psychology consultant and works with agencies outside of education. If you have any questions for the presenter during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I'll hand it over to our presenter.
Well, hello, everybody. You'll notice in all of the information he just provided, nowhere in there did it say I am a technology person. Unfortunately, even though I've taught many technology courses, my nickname has always been Sparky with the IT departments at my campuses. They say that I can take down any technology anywhere at any time. So that's my superhuman strength. I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you all and share a PowerPoint that I developed for the North Carolina Community Colleges System Convention on this topic. It was actually originally to be a live presentation. It was supposed to happen last fall, and then we moved it to the spring, and now it's virtual. So I'm going to condense the files and the PowerPoint as I'm sharing it with you, and I hope I don't speak too quickly or go over, speed past too much information. Please feel free to stop me at any point because I am a very interactive presenter and instructor. So this is naturally unnatural for me to be speaking to a camera and not engaging with the people that are with me. So we're going to start by my trying to share my screen, and we'll see how that goes. Maybe I have to double click it. There we go. Awesome. And slideshow. There we go. Okay, so we actually named this Flipped Classroom, Two Sides of the Coin, and had an acronym that was developed, which will come a little bit later in the conversation. But it was originally to be shared between with myself and a colleague from a different department. But we have diverse teaching styles, and it just didn't work the way we were trying to get it together. So you've just got me. A little bit of the background here. I always start any class that I'm teaching, whether it's a traditional seated class or a hybrid class or an online synchronous course, whatever, with an agenda, basically because of the priming mechanisms that we study with regard to memory. So these things will help keep me on track, as well as helping prime you all for the things that we're going to cover just very briefly in this conversation. So we're going to talk a little bit about brain research, what a flipped classroom is, the relevant pedagogy, the history, some current research, and I want to focus mainly on some examples of student work and interaction with my classes, simply because I think that might help bring this more to light or to life. I was actually just an attendee in a presentation, and people were asking questions about how to get students to engage in synchronous classrooms, and some of this will go to that. Now, when I'm teaching my classes, I begin every single day with a role question, and the challenge here for me is I cannot see anything that's in the chat room, and your microphones are muted, so we're going to skip past that. Typically, what I would do is start by asking a question such as, which way does the toilet paper roll go? Or how do you squeeze the toothpaste on the first couple of days of classes? And this is just to get students engaged and responsive so that they are not as threatened and uncomfortable in an unusual situation, especially in a flipped classroom environment, because not everybody is comfortable with this, nor they have they've been trained how a flipped classroom works. So it gets them talking. I also then get them to support their position, which leads us to doing research and critical thinking and supporting our positions with regard to APA format for psychology and other hard sciences. I would normally, again, also start with a little bit of a puzzle, again, something to get us all interacting. And I apologize that I can't figure out how to do that in this forum with the Zoom. We actually use Collaborate. So we're going to start with talking a little bit about brain research. And one of the things that we've learned over time with regard to brain research is that there are passive teaching methods and there are participatory teaching methods. There's a lot of research regarding these concepts from both sides, as there is with most research. But what I would encourage you to do is consider your own learning styles and the learning styles of your students, whatever grade or age you are teaching. And think about how much information you retain simply by hearing something or simply by reading something, and how much more information you retain with the opportunity to engage in the material. Really get your hands dirty and get in there and work with the material and ask questions and challenge things. Now, I've noted to the side that with regard to this particular chart, there is a caveat, and that is that we all have different learning styles. So some of us do tend to learn better auditorily, although that's not as common. Many students are what we would call tactile or kinesthetic learners, and I'm sure you all are probably familiar with those terms. And so this really lends itself to being able to instruct students in that capacity. Now, if we were in a live setting right now, I would ask you, and I'm going to ask you anyhow, because I understand that you can answer in the chat, how many of you all have any experience with teaching in a flipped classroom format? Is it a completely new concept for you, or do you have any background at all? So in this format, I'm not really sure how I can see your replies, but if you would do me a favor, possibly, and answer by raising your hand or making some sort of a gesture so that I can get an idea where to start with this material. So 3, wonderful. Thank you, Brian, for allowing me to see that. Okay. Okay. And the number goes up. This is good. So we've got about 55 people in here, and it looks like so far the numbers are moving higher and higher, that people have some sort of a background with teaching in a flipped classroom. So I don't want to start completely from scratch and insult your intelligence or your abilities. What I would like to ask you all to do, if you don't mind, is to ask me questions as we're going through, and I will do my best to field them. I think I can see them now. I've been teaching online since 2015. Okay. So how many instructors do I have in here, or individuals do I have in here who originally taught in a seated classroom? Can you raise your hands for that again for me? Okay. And we're going to stop there, and let me ask you one last question. How many of y'all have moved to an online or digital format because everything's online and digital right now? Okay, so that one was quick. So basically, you all are classroom instructors who have suddenly had to become technologists and teach in a completely different fashion than you are trained or interested or used to or comfortable doing. So this format lends itself to both synchronous learning online and seated classroom or a hybrid classroom format. It is a bit more of a challenge with non-traditional fully online or fully digital classes, but there is a way to do it, and there are ways that we can do it. So I'm going to move forward a little bit. Let's see if I can minimize this now. Okay, and we're going to talk about exactly what is a flipped classroom. It's a little bit different from what we would consider to be an inverted classroom. Some people think about a flipped classroom as in students do all the reading and the prep work before, and then you come to class and put them in breakout groups and let them chat, and it's very disordered. Whereas in a flipped classroom environment, what we're actually doing is focusing on a specific format that requires pre-work, from the learner, and then an engaging and developed and appropriate classroom atmosphere to cover certain pieces of the material, and then follow up. And you really need these three pieces in order to be able to get the full benefit of teaching in a flipped classroom format. So, let's see. Oh, there we go. So when we think about education, and we think about what many of us have had some experience with regard to Bloom's taxonomy, you think about the idea that there are different levels of understanding. And I think we all agree with this, that there's rote memorization when you're just regurgitating fact back to somebody. There's a little bit of understanding where you can somewhat make a larger more generalized comment or perception of content. And we move up this ladder towards the ultimate or penultimate idea of being able to create something from the knowledge that you have. And what typically happens in a traditional classroom is in class, teachers are lecturing, they're showing videos, they're having students memorize words. I recall we had an educator who came to speak to my classes, well, to all of us, and said that we needed to teach every vocabulary word 7 ways in the classroom. And I said, well, I'm teaching biomed. They have 120 to learn in the first 5 days of class. There's no way we can do that. So you'll find that the flipped classroom format puts the onus of the education on the learner, the student, for whatever type of class it is. And then you come to class and the instructor guides and helps translate what they've covered prior to class into something meaningful. And then they go home and have a reflection activity. So what does that look like? Okay. When this idea first began, it was back in the 1990s, as you can see on the screen. And what had happened was there was a physicist who was sending work home with his students to be able to do preparatory work and then come to class, but there was still more lecture. And over time, this developed to think, how and why are we teaching this way when we've learned, and research indicates that students, individuals in general, don't necessarily retain material that is just spouted at us. So for example, this PowerPoint right now, it would be easy for you to doze off. It would be easy for you to be making a grocery list in your head while I'm going through this and just speaking monotonously. So typically in class, I would be interjecting with questions. I would having students engage if I were a lecture instructor, which I'm not. And this is why my colleague and I could not present together, because they had been instructed and trained as an instructor that lecture is required. And the current research and the current literature that they were looking at with regard to flipped classrooms was that you provide a lecture for the students to watch prior to coming to class, and then they do classroom activities, and then they go home and they write about it. But I've been teaching since 1999. And when I began as an instructor, it was as a lateral entry instructor into the math and sciences courses. And we were taught to teach what is called science through inquiry, which you all may have some background with or knowledge of. And at the time, the buzzword or the idea was that you would come to school with kits, like boxes of materials for your students who were supposed to have read the night before, and then you give them these boxes and you let them play and you let them write about what they learned. And as you might imagine, it didn't go quite as well as expected and as hoped. So I've kind of fashioned this and done this additional research on how to develop this in a flipped classroom format. This is the program and the methodology of teaching that I have adopted based upon the way I was trained as a teacher at first. And I'm going to stop right here and leave this on the screen because I want you all to see that the idea of teaching in a flipped classroom is applicable to multiple disciplines. We've got medicine, STEM. I taught it in science and math. I now teach it in psychology and criminal justice courses. And it's actually quite beneficial, but there are certain things that must be done preparatory before the course actually even takes off to make the students comfortable with this. Otherwise, you're going to meet with a lot of walls. And you still may have challenges. I still have challenges. I have 2 classes that I'm teaching right now that function completely differently, and I have to engage with them differently. I'm gonna leave this on the screen for just a second and check the Q&A. You teach them both presently. Okay, so how many of you all, again, by a show of hands, currently use a flipped classroom format in your instruction? That is the way you teach. 7, 8. Okay, awesome. This is wonderful. So those of you who have some experience in this, if you don't mind, what I'm going to ask you to do while I'm speaking is to share any suggestions, questions, challenges that you're having in the chat or in the Q&A so that I can attempt to answer them as we go along, and also towards the end. I have about 45 minutes to speak, so I want to make sure that I address those personal questions, as that's kind of the goal here. So to move forward, hopefully, if I can get my screen to change, there we go. So we had actually developed an acronym to try to explain how we can view teaching in a flipped classroom format. With both sides of the coin, the instructor or facilitator has certain responsibilities and obligations, and also the students do. So you all can read, and I'm gonna, you'll have access to the PowerPoint, but you can see that our goal as an instructor or a facilitator is to liberate the students, allow them to think, encourage them to use their brains and actually engage with the material. We also start by earmarking information, providing little tidbits of information. This might be important to you, hence the agenda, and certain other things that I do to prime my students before class. We also provide an abridged version of the content. For example, psychology textbooks, if you have a 40-page chapter, I do not expect my students to memorize 40 pages, which is a little daunting for them and would be for us as well. And I'm sure you all have the same perception. That's a little bit much for people to have to do at one time. And then we are responsible for reviewing the information, for kind of wrapping it all up, debriefing it at the end, getting some feedback from the students as to what they received. Is there anything that I need to clarify? And then we want to naturalize and nurture this situation. I think you all might agree, hope you all might agree, that we are in a society with regard to education that it has become habit to simply tell people what they need to know and how they need to know it and what they need to do. We don't allow for any experimentation or failure, for crying out loud. And the Socratic method is completely gone in many cases in public education. So when students get to me at the college level, and even when they came to me at the public level, this was a new concept for them. The idea that they could think and they could be responsible for their own education. Some are intimidated by it and some fully embrace it and they run with it. And it's very exciting to watch. And that's what I'm going to share with you in just a moment. On the student side, they need to be able to look and listen and prepare for class, whether that's reading a textbook, watching videos from YouTube that I assign or that they share with each other, or that some instructors do provide a taped lecture. I'm not comfortable with that. Again, it's not the way I was trained, so I've never taught that way. So I do not provide lecture prior to class. I don't lecture in class. We chat, my students and I, we talk about the material. The students also need to agree to engage with the material, and I cause them to engage from the first day in class. I ask them how they do their toilet paper roll, and they have to answer me. I ask them to do a microphone check and to tell me a story, and I do this to encourage them that it's a safe space. It's a safe arena. You can do this and you can fall on your face, and I allow myself to fall on my face in front of them. As a matter of fact, I have one class that I'm teaching right now. The very first day of class, my technology failed. It booted me out of Collaborate 3 times. And when I came back to class, these guys had taken control of the class and were showing each other their textbooks on their cameras, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And I've done so much with this one class that was really receptive to this model of learning, and another class that I'm pulling along a little bit more. They're not as comfortable. It's a classroom of older learners. Students need to agree to ask and assist. First of all, I encourage them to ask and assist each other. I set up what's called the student coffee house in the discussion room. And I tell them to please share their questions there with their colleagues. Even if they email me, I say, please share this in the coffee house to assist your colleagues. And again, certain classes jump right in and they're immediately asking and assisting, and they're thoroughly enjoying the idea that they get to do this. In other classes, I have to handhold a little bit more, which is typical, I think, for all of our classes. I ask the students at the end of the assignment and the engagement to reflect on the material. They have discussion boards that they engage in at the end. They're required to reply to colleagues. They're required to substantiate their positions with scientific information, citations, and references. I require APA because I'm a science instructor through and through, and most of them are not familiar, and that's also a little bit of training that we get to do. And then I ask them to nurture this and then to naturalize this in themselves so that they become inquisitive individuals and members of society, not just classroom learners. So I'm going to check the Q&A again. Hard to get students to do. Yes, this is true. I'm going to address both of these. So one statement says, in flipped, students tend to say they prefer lecture. Interesting. Yes. Well, I think in lecture, students, they say they want more interaction. How do you find the balance? I think that's very true in life. You know, grass is always greener on the other side. I operate from a point of a sense of humor, and I joke with students, I would probably tell them that the grass is always greener on the other side. And I have students actually teach the class. That's part of what we do in this flipped classroom format. And we're going to talk about some of those precise examples. The balance looks different in each class, I can tell you that. I am violently opposed to lecture, so I do not lecture. They understand this from the get-go, but we look at information in different ways. So some students and some classes that are not as comfortable with doing the pre-reading or the pre-work, they don't know what that looks like. They've had no training in this. When we get to class and they can't answer the questions, we do an immediate treasure hunt, and I send them to the internet to find an answer, and then we have a battle. I mean, we discuss it right there in class. Is that correct? Is it not correct? What can you do to show me that it is correct? Why it is correct? What are the biases of the authors who wrote this article? That sort of thing. So whereas in another class, they will come to class and say, hey, I saw this information. I looked into chapter 18 when we're in chapter 2, and this is what it says in chapter 18, and they'll have their own little debate, and they get so much more out of that than my standing at the front and telling them what to study. That it's been a pretty incredible experience all the way around. I will say there are some classes that I am dragging them through it the whole way, but I try to do it with a sense of humor and understanding that it's new and it's uncomfortable a lot for some students. And I try to work with them through that as well. We'll speak about that more in detail as we move forward. Hard to get students to do the independent work before class. You are correct. And this goes to that other question. Some students naturally want to excel, you know this, and some would prefer just to melt into the wall and have you not call on them. So I tease my students in class, in a seated class, and I would tell them things like, if you're looking down at your desk and I can see colors changing on your face, I know you're not paying attention because you're on your phone under the desk, okay? If you are in your group, I want you to know I can hear everything that's going on in this classroom from every corner, and I can see your eyebrows go up, and I'm going to come to you and ask you, what question do you have? How can I help you? Let's look this up. And I sit down with them. Like, my role is not instructor, it's facilitator. I'm facilitating their opportunity to learn. So what I have found, in answer to your question specifically, is instead of using negative punishment for students who don't do the pre-work, I use a lot of positive reinforcement for those that do, and any step closely accommodating or closely approaching the goal, we get a lot of praise and a lot of encouragement to continue to move towards that goal. Here's another question. I'm sorry. What do you do to have them turn on their videos? Well, oh, you mean as far as, sorry, let me clarify. Do you mean to be able to see them while we're in class? So that I'm looking at them? I'm sorry. Yes. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your viewpoint, at my current campus where I'm full-time faculty, we are not allowed to require that. We do not require them to have on their videos or their microphones, and this goes to levels of comfort. So when I say, hey, let's do a microphone check, they don't get that I'm just getting them to turn on their microphones. Or if they do, they like me enough or they're willing enough to go through and do that. We do not require that they turn on their cameras and allow, because some students are uncomfortable with their surroundings comparative to other students. And then I've had students that are more than happy to want to eat a bowl of cereal in the classroom and be completely comfortable. So it's a matter of building that community with each separate class. I do spend some time covering what we call netiquette from another training in another course that I went through. Certain things are required, and this is one of the reasons I require scientific information to support your position, not just my brother said, or I think, or my friend did this the other day, unless you can also address it scientifically. So I'm encouraging them to bring real life circumstances and situations to the conversation, but support it with the material you read. How does this address parts of the brain, or how does this address learning styles, or whatever it is we happen to be discussing at that time? Did that help at all? Let me just check for understanding here. I don't see any further questions, so I'm going to go on to the next screen just for the moment. It is still showing that I have 3 questions. There we go. 3 new questions. I guess I have to click on it every time. I'm learning too as we go. So you can see this is exactly the way I teach. I'm very open and very real with my students so that they are not intimidated and they realize it's a learning process all the way around. I learn more from my students every single class period and every single year probably than they do from me. And I probably shouldn't admit that out loud, but I'm fascinated with them and the way they think and the ideas they have. So Andrea says, or Andrea, how do you assess? Are there quizzes every class or homework? Or what do you use for the in-class work? Okay, these are terrific questions. I'm actually going to go to a screen to talk about specific assessment tools. In one of the classes I teach, actually 2 of the classes, there are OERs. So currently I teach at 2 campuses in 2 states. This semester am teaching 3 different pieces of content in one discipline. So I teach abnormal psychology, developmental psychology, and general psychology. However, I teach 8-week classes, 10-week classes, 12-week classes, 14 and 16. And my general psychology courses in the 2 states have 2 different textbooks, and they're all in different orders. So all of that said, some campuses prefer or require that you have a quiz component, or all the instructors at least have a quiz component. That's one of my classes, and that's fine. I didn't develop the quizzes. This is a campus policy or a departmental policy. But I personally, when I'm developing courses and tweaking courses, which I've done to all of these, I assess through their discussion boards and writing assignments. They have a discussion board for every week, and I do a chapter a week. Some classes we do 2 chapters a week. They have a discussion board prompt for every chapter, and they have to answer not only the prompt related to the content, which may have 3 or 4 questions within, but they also have to answer the prompt that says, now how might you apply this knowledge to your final research project? And they have to reply to 2 colleagues about each prompt by the end of the week. And I assess based on, are these certain words, do I see these words in their material that they're providing? Are they supporting their position? Do they have all of the pieces that are required? Are they basically correct? In the classes that require a quiz, there is a base level of understanding that's already being assessed. I'm looking for a few levels up. I'm looking for analysis, creativity. Are you going above and beyond? And that is how they are evaluated in the discussion boards. They also, for each class, have 5 large writing assignments. I shouldn't say large, formal writing assignments. On the weeks that they have those writing assignments, their responsibility for the discussion board is to share their writing with their colleagues, and they comment on each other's. And their writing is actually a formal document. I've built a template for them in APA with a cover page, abstract, background research, their experiment that they've created, the results of their experiment, and their reference page. And they enjoy doing that because they get to think. some students, not as much as others, but the bulk of them. And so I typically use written assignments or written assessments as opposed to quizzes. When do you have them? Yeah, unfortunately, we can't require it on either of my campuses. So it makes it a little difficult for me, kind of like right now, talking to you all, and I can't see you. And I would like to be able to see if you're smiling or laughing, or if I can see the light bulb go on, or if I can see your brows knitted together, that indicates that I've confused you. So I ask for a lot of feedback and a lot of confirmation before I move on to other material. All of that said, does anyone have any additional questions at this point? And I'm going to move on to the next screen. Okay, so I think I've gotten all. If anyone can see that there are questions I've missed, please let me know, because I may be doing this wrong. All right, so let's go on to the next screen. A lot of your questions that you're asking, these are very good because they go to specific content, and this is timely. It means that you're thinking ahead and you're actually tracking with me on the progress of this PowerPoint, which is kind of the same thing that I'm looking for with my students. When they start asking the questions leading me forward in our conversation, then I start to go forward. So the basic application for a flipped classroom indicates that there's before class work that is required, and there's during class work that is required, and after class work. The idea specifically is that typically in class, we work with a lot of memorization and a lot of lecture and a lot. So we move that to the before class work, whether that is reading the textbook, highlighting the keywords, whatever they need to do to learn that information, and they do it differently, is fine. Then when we come to class, we apply it. I may have them in breakout groups. I may have an entire class playing popcorn or around the world or whatever, so that we're active the entire class time and they're applying material that they've looked up. With the caveat, if they don't know the answer, we can have an immediate treasure hunt and we all look up the answer, or how to answer the question, so that nobody feels like they haven't done what they're supposed to do, even if they haven't done what they're supposed to do. It's not my intent to call them out. It's my intent to make them comfortable. And so again, they'll ask me questions sometimes and I'll say, that's a really good question. What do you think? Let's go, let's have a treasure hunt. Students who have been with me for a while have come to a number of my courses or been in a number of my courses. I'll say, a new student will say, I have a question, and I'll say, I have an answer. And they'll say, no, she's not going to answer your question. She's just going to ask you another question. And that is true. I'll lead them to the information so they have confidence in their ability to find it with or without me. Which I don't know, might work me out of a job at some point, but it hasn't so far. So when we're considering the flipped classroom format, there are actually 4 pillars, and apparently everybody likes acronyms. A flexible environment. So I don't teach every class the same way every day. There are some standards, so the students have that level of comfort knowing that certain things are going to be continuous, such as there's always going to be an agenda. They know where we're starting and why, and they know where we're headed in the conversation. That also helps spark their minds to think, oh, that's right, the book talked about this and I have a question about it, and they jot it down and share the question with me. With some classes, I even hand out Post-it notes and ask them to hold their questions and write them all down so that they can ask each other. So the flexible environment, the learning culture, the relationship that students have with each other, their learning community, also their relationship that they have with me is exceptionally important. If they don't feel comfortable failing, they're not going to extend themselves. And so again, I do model what that looks like, whether intentionally or not. They get to see me fail a good bit, and they get to see each other fail, and they get to joke about it and see that you can recover from not answering this question correctly, and Dr. Barker is not going to lambast you, and your colleagues are not going to lambast you. And it's it's a tremendous thing to watch, and I'll share some of that with you in a moment. Intentional content, again, I'm not coming into class saying, okay, y'all have read, what do you want to talk about? There are sometimes that I do that just to jar them into reality, but that's not the goal of the flipped classroom. It's not to take any responsibility off of me or off of the educator. It's to provide information in an intentional fashion so that if they get off track, and the off-track portion does not seem like it's going to bring something to the conversation, I gently steer them back to track. Okay, there are times that their off-track conversation is more effective than anything that I have planned, and I allow them to go with that as well. But that's me. You don't necessarily have to do that. And then a professional educator. I think it's always important to have people who have training and background with regard to pedagogy in their specific area, as well as with learning at different ages and different times and different formats. And I think that's just obvious information. So again, we mentioned that this format can be utilized in a traditional seated classroom, in a blended learning environment such as a hybrid classroom, or synchronous collaborate or Zoom portions. I will tell you, this is the first time I've ever been able to get a Zoom share the screen session to work correctly, so I'm quite excited about this. I got to learn something new today. I typically use Collaborate. That's the platform that is supported by Blackboard, but I've also been trained in Moodle, School Center, Google Classroom, Blackboard, Canvas, and there's another one, and I can't think of what that is right now. So you can apply this in multiple arenas. I'm happy to give feedback to anyone. I mean, y'all can share my email account or contact me directly through Kim Barker Consulting, which you can find online. The consulting website actually addresses more of my forensic psychology hat, but I'm happy to field questions or help lesson plan or anything. I enjoy doing this. Let's see, fully distance or digital learning, that one's a challenge. And I will admit this freely, because you have to build an expectation that students are going to read on their own, and that they're going to do that prior to the week, so that when you're in the week of that particular content, sorry, my dog is trying to come in here, so that when you're in that week of that particular content, they hit the ground running Monday with questions. I arrange my weeks to run Monday through Friday. All assignments are due on the following Monday. Monday at the end of the week is what I call it. And I open their new week's information the Friday or sometimes Thursday before the week. So they have over the weekend to see what they're supposed to read and look up and prepare for the week's learning. And then the discussion boards or written assignments are all due at the end of the week. I have found more often than not that students that are in a fully digital classroom or in a digital environment have an understanding of how to do this. Now, there are a few that were put into a fully digitized or digital classroom or distance classroom and didn't realize. And that has to be handled a little bit differently on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so I'm seeing something that's lighting up over here that says more, and I guess that's the chat. Now, again, I apologize for interrupting, but wanted to let everyone know we have about 10 minutes left. Okay, so
that was me. I was just wanted to make sure there's enough time at the very end. I was just going to say we're almost at the 5-minute mark now. I just want to give you a quick.
That's fine, and thank you for doing it. If you'll see, I keep looking over here at my phone because I didn't set a timer. And yes, Zoom pets are the best. My students enjoy. If I can't get them to turn on their camera for anything else, is to show me their pets. I had one student who had free-range birds in their home, and they did their research on the psychological aspect of clipped or non-clipped wings for their birds and how it affected their interactions. And the birds would fly around, and she was more than happy to share that with us, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. We got a big kick out of that. Let's see if I can see anything else. New to flipped classrooms, a what classroom? Okay, so for those of you that it seems like I have been ignoring the entire time, it's because I was looking at the question and answer questions as opposed to just the chat question as well. New format, new format. Okay. So it looks like I'm somewhat caught up with the questions. Let me zoom through, no pun, the rest of these slides just to give you an idea what's here. I believe the slides are going to be made available to students. You can also, again, reach out to me individually. So here are some examples of pre-work textbook material, reading assigned articles. I assign them videos to watch. They assign each other videos to watch. Most of my videos come from students because I'm not cool. I'm old and I'm not interesting. I don't have interesting activities and I don't play on my phone. But they grew up with their phones in their hands. So if there's interesting content out there, they can find it. And one thing that I say to them If they tell me they couldn't access a video, I tell them to pretend it was a game and they want to win, pretend it's a video game and you really want to win. So how would you find the cheats? And they laugh at me because they think, oh my goodness, she knows we can find whatever we want to find whenever we want to find it. And this is true, they can. They will try to get out of doing it sometimes. And I say, okay, if you couldn't find that video, find one like it and send it to me and I'll use it in future classes and you'll get extra credit. So in class examples, open forum discussion. I put them in breakout groups in Collaborate. In the classroom, they're in physical groups. I have debates. I divide the room left and right side. I divide them by height. I divide them by gender. I divide them by everything you're not supposed to divide people by nowadays, and let them debate. And they have a really good time doing this. Treasure hunts, I think I've mentioned that. I do these on the fly. Sometimes we do them for assignments. Sometimes we have experiments where I bring in something and I tell them to play with it, or I have a developed experiment. Sometimes they come in, the assignment is, okay, develop an experiment on the census, bring it to class. We'll collect data. I've sent them to other classrooms or to have them share their experimental process. Now, in the background, I've also reached out to other instructors to make sure I wasn't making anybody crazy. We like doing teach the class a lot. Students like to talk. They really do. And they're always being told not to talk. So I give them the opportunity and have them teach their colleagues the content, even on the fly. I'll do this. And then reflection activities can be PowerPoints, developed PowerPoints, discussion boards, journaling. We know from brain research that about 95% of the material you repeat to another person or you teach another person, you are more likely to retain. I know that there are a lot of people that don't agree with this brain research, but I would challenge you to test it out. If your students go home and they teach their parent and their parent has to sign a piece of paper saying they taught me, they will come back understanding the material better than if you had told them. And I guarantee this because every time I teach something, I know it better than I did before that session. The recording, yes. So I'm going to very quickly, there are pros and cons. You can look at that later. We talked about different applications where you can use this methodology. These are the things that might interest you. If you do look at the PowerPoint later, these are my students owning their education. This particular class right now came out the gate, first week of school. I gave an assignment and they went directly to the student coffee house and told each other where they found the information, how to download the textbook, what their thoughts were on the information. It was incredible. And that was a completely digital classroom, if I recall. In this classroom right here, this student in the top left arbitrarily decided to develop a Quizlet. They shared it with their classmates, said I could share it with another class. You can see this down here. And the other class said, please tell them how helpful that was. Quizlet is not helpful to me. I don't enjoy it. But my students have come to class and said, hey, I had some trouble with this content. So I built and I had to write the word down because I forget it, a Kahoot. And they came to class and they taught class. They gave information and they tested their colleagues on whether or not they received and retained the information. And it was a competitive measure. These were not assignments. These are students who found they had a personal difficulty with something. This was a book walk. This was in how to do APA citations. So they created a PowerPoint to teach their colleagues and have allowed me to use their name and their materials here. These are just the screenshots of the covers because I can also provide you with the actual PowerPoint if you have an interest. And here's what an agenda looks like. It just says we're going to do roll, we're going to review, link to prior learning, housekeeping. Is there anything that you want to wrap up from previous work? Is there any information I need to give you about holidays or upcoming assignments, whatever? Books or articles? Sorry, I'm answering a question now. Yes, absolutely. So Saul, that's a very good question. If you look at the PowerPoint, I've attached some materials for you from background research that helped develop this pedagogy, and then also current research that shows you various applications to the medical field or STEM or psychology or whatever. Also, if you contact me directly, I'm more than happy to help provide some material for you because different people do this in different fashions. So I hope that helped answer that question a little bit. And I think we're right at 1:45. And I don't want to overstay my welcome. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, take the time and look at the PowerPoint. You'll see some interesting student work and written work, everything. And I was only two slides short, so that was pretty good. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I thoroughly enjoy talking about this. I'm very passionate about it, as you might be able to tell. So thank you for being here.
Of course. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm just going to go over a quick housekeeping notes on our end, and we'll transition into the next presentation. So I just launched a quick 3-question poll on the presentation. We just want you guys to take a minute to kind of give your feedback and let us know how you feel. And then also just the next concurrent session is going to begin at 2 o'clock. You can view the chat for the session meeting room links or access the conference website for a complete list of concurrent sessions and their descriptions. While you're there, you can access our conference website. Don't forget to swing by the exhibit hall to say hello to the Hawks team. If you can view a quick 5-minute demo and be entered in to win an hourly giveaway, your choice of a smart pen, standing desk, or a $100 Amazon gift card. And we look forward to seeing everyone at the next session. Thank you again, Dr. Barker. That was great.
Thank you so much for having me. You all have a great day. Don't hesitate to reach out. And where do I click to exit the session?
You're good. I will get it off there. So you'll.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You might have an end button or a leave meeting in the bottom right of your corner, but you don't have the screen.
Yeah, it seems to be gone. So you can kick me out whenever.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much again.
Thank y'all. There we go.